And hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Stephanie Vance, and we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to our Bike Summit What to Know Before You Go session. And we're looking forward to having you here in a few weeks for the Bike Summit. And I just want to double check to make sure that the audio is working. So if you can hear the sound of my voice, please hit the raise your hand button on your screen. And that's a little button that looks like a hand. All right, great. I've got some hands raised, so I'm going to go ahead and put those hands down, and because I have the power to do that. And we'll go ahead and get started here. All right, so our topics, we're going to talk a little bit about the webinar itself, some keys for being heard and agree with, homework assignments, and your checklists for before you come to the summit. So about the webinar, these are the logistics, about muting and questions, etc. So everyone is joined in a mute-only mode, and the reason why we do that is because we want to make sure that we mitigate any background noise. But there is an opportunity to ask questions. There is a questions box, and you can see something that says questions with a little plus sign next to it. If you open that, you can type in questions, and I'll address those as I go along. If you're not seeing that, you should see a red background with a white arrow, which is a toolbar, and if you click on that, then you should open up your toolbar and you'll see the questions box that you can use to send us questions. And have no fears if you don't get to your question or if you're not able to type it in or whatever. We will be happy to address your questions after the session, so we're not abandoning you. And we will have the follow-up materials and the recording of this so you can enjoy it over and over and over again. So do type in your questions as we go along, and I'll make sure that I try to catch them as we go through. So. I don't know if I've met a lot of you. This is me. I'm Stephanie Vance. I got a beautifully airbrushed picture of myself, so I have to put it up there every once in a while. I am the disembodied voice. And I have a background on Capitol Hill. I used to work for Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who is, of course, the chair of the Congressional Bike Caucus. And used to be a lobbyist for NPR. I've written some books on advocacy. Now I'm a consultant to a variety of groups, including the League, on how to be effective or how advocates can be effective when going to Capitol Hill. So exactly what I'm working with you all now on. And I'm really happy because I know how frustrating it can be to get your legislators to listen to you, much less agree with you. So that's what I tend to try and do. And I come at it from the perspective of a congressional staff person. So I'm the person being advocated at. I'm just like the people you will be meeting when you're here in Washington, D.C., although most of them are much, much younger. All right. Now I'm actually going to turn it over to Karen for a quick hello, because you are not officially greeted until you are greeted by her. So Karen, I'm going to unmute your line. Oops. There we go, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks to all the rest of you for being on the webinar and coming to the summit. We've got a great program this year. I'm really excited about it. But I'm also really excited to have all of you in Washington, because right now, Congress is really trying to think about how are we going to fund transportation? Are we going to raise the gas tax? Are we going to do something else? And the question of whether or not biking and walking should even be part of the transportation program is starting to come up. And so it's going to be great to have you in D.C. to help us push back on that and say, absolutely, we're transportation. We'll talk about the specific issues next week, but what Stephanie's covering tonight is really important. It's a how do you be such a great messenger. So thanks again for being on the webinar. Thanks to Stephanie, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Karen. And I'm going to mute your line again, but do feel free to jump in, raising your hand, or however you would like, to let me know if you've got any questions or comments for our folks. So. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone has the details on the general information about the summit itself, and this is obviously on the League of American Bicyclists webpage. You can just click on the National Bike Summit and you'll get all of the current detail information about what's going on, including the most up-to-date agendas, etc. Now, just so I can get a sense of the kind of people we have on the line, I want to see if you've been to the Bike Summit before, if you haven't, if you're not sure, that's a little scary, but so click one of those options. Got 86% of the votes in. You guys are awesome voters. All right, we got 93% of the votes in. I am super impressed by that. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So you'll see that we're kind of evenly split. So if you've been to the Bike Summit before and you feel like I'm not raising something important or you'd like to jump in when I have something to say, please do type something into the Q&A box, and I'll make sure that all your excellent points are raised as well, because I know a lot of you have done this a fair amount. So I know that you probably have some tips and techniques from your own experiences. All right, so general information, just make sure that you've gone to the League's page and clicked on the National Bike Summit link, because that's going to give you exactly what's going on, and they're always updating that. So I just want to start with some quick thoughts about your role in all of this, because I think we throw around a lot of terms like education, public relations, advocacy, and lobbying. And so I just want to quickly define what I mean by those. So education is making sure that the elected officials and the staff people you're talking to know what it is you do. And a lot of them don't necessarily know that. They know, people get on bikes and they ride places, but they don't really know a lot about what people in the community are doing to create safer routes to school, or to create rails to trails, or whatever kind of project you're involved with, or simply just safe commuting. The elected officials on Capitol Hill don't know as much about that as we would like them to. So that's where the education comes in. That's just simply making sure they know what you do. And I'll give you some resources for finding some of the information about your specific community in just a little bit. Public relations is about making sure that not only do they know what you do, but they feel good about it. And there's certainly a public relations component to what we're talking about in Washington, D.C., but I tend to think of that more on the media side. To me, what you're really focusing on is advocacy. And that is, you've helped them understand what it is you do, you've helped them feel positively about it, and now you're asking them to be engaged in some way. And obviously, for us in Washington, D.C., that's going to be engaged in supporting the League's policy provisions. But it can also be just something as simple as asking them to be engaged by coming on a bike ride in the district, or just something that makes them say, yes, I'll do that, or no, I won't. Because advocacy is basically the art of pleading and arguing for a cause, and that's what we're doing. And the best way to do that is to ask them to actually do something. And we'll talk in a minute about that art of making the ask. Again, the asks and the policy issues will be discussed in more detail next week, but we'll talk about how you're going to do that, and then we'll apply those policy issues when we talk next week. And then lobbying is really, that's what the professionals, that's what your folks in D.C. are working on. It's the people who keep track of the thousands of bills that are introduced, and there's usually about 10,000 every congressional session. Only about 4% of those pass. Obviously, a very small percentage are about the issues that we're concerned about. So your lobbyists, people in Washington, D.C., are the ones who are kind of following that and making sure that you all know what issues are important and what to be talking to legislators about. So just coming to D.C. and meeting with legislators isn't necessarily quote-unquote lobbying. That's definitely in the advocacy realm for most of you, unless you are a professional government relations person. So I just want to make sure education and advocacy are the sort of two main elements of what we're going to be doing in Washington, D.C. in a couple weeks. Now, if you haven't been here before, I just want to give you some basic logistics. I know that people are often concerned about what's happening, when their meetings are, who they're meeting with, et cetera. Your meetings are being scheduled by your state coordinators, although in some cases there will be states that don't have state coordinators, in which case our firm, Advocacy Associates, is scheduling those meetings. But those are the people, the state coordinators will be getting in touch with you to let you know which meetings they're having scheduled for you. Many of the state coordinators schedule for all of the legislators in the state. But your responsibility as an individual advocate will be to really get to know some information about your two senators and the one representative that represents the area where you live or work. And in some cases, that might be two different representatives. And I'll show you how to look those up, but that's kind of the crux of what you're going to be focusing in on in terms of any research that you want to do before you come to the summit. In terms of the details of the meetings, when they'll be, where they'll be, those are some what your state coordinators are working on, and they'll be getting in touch with you with some more details on that. But just to give you a quick sense of some of the basic logistics, where am I going? You'll see that this right here is the House side of the Capitol, so this is where all the members of the House will be, and those are the 435 people that represent all those individual districts. And then over here on the other side is the Senate office buildings, and those are where you'll find your senators who represent. There's 2 for each state. And then in the middle is the Capitol, and you'll see that there's the Capitol Visitors Center there, and that's where you might even have some meetings in the Capitol. Sometimes the leadership does their meetings there. There's 2 metro stops that are allow you to access the Capitol campus, and of course there's you can have access by bike. So and there'll be a lot more information about that at the summit, but I just want to get some of that out of the way because I think people get concerned about that at first. What am I wearing? That is, you know, we like to suggest people dress up, that they look, you know, sort of business gear. We're not talking cocktail dresses, but when I say dressed up, I mean, you know, like you're going to a business meeting. Business casual is good for the summit itself. We really ask that people not wear their Lycra to the meetings, which has happened in the past and is never very good. What am I eating? There's restaurants all over the Capitol, so you'll get a lot of that information when you're at the summit. Yes, and there are bathrooms. I actually had someone ask me where are the bathrooms, and I noted them on the map. So if you need that level of information, I am happy to provide it. But all of this, really, all of the details on this, all of the details on the logistics, they'll be covering at the summit. I just want to make sure you know that we know you need to know these things. So, all right, but let's get into the crux of what we really want to talk about today, which is the 5 keys to being heard. And before I do that, I'm just going to check in to see, yes, there's a person who was wondering how to ask questions, and you have discovered that because you've typed it into the Q&A box. So yes, you can type in any questions there, and I will be happy to address them. All right, so the crux of what we want to talk about are our 5 keys to being heard. And the first key is to take a look at the larger context. Now, obviously, transportation reauthorization, and as Karen was mentioning, the issues of the gas tax and how bicycling and walking fit into the overall transportation structure, that's going to be a big one, and that's why I've included it on this list. But when you look at this list, you'll see that there are a whole bunch of other big things that Congress is thinking about. Budget, potential sequestrations, tax reform, debt ceilings coming up pretty soon. We will always have our perennial votes about healthcare reform. So there's a lot of stuff that they're working on, and when we go in and talk to them, we just have to be emotionally prepared that transportation may not always be at the top of their agenda. But that is a good thing because it gives you, as an advocate, an opportunity to sort of indoctrinate them into your views. So you can actually become the person who is the expert on transportation that they'll turn to, and as you can see from the huge array of things that they usually are talking about, they do definitely need outside experts, and that's kind of what your role is, especially as we were talking about in that education piece. So in that larger context, there are a lot of different kinds of messages that resonate, especially now. So obviously the savings in the budget, big ones. I think one of the biggest one is compromise. And I know that sounds weird because we're talking about a fairly partisan environment, but what legislators are really looking for are places where they can demonstrate that they're coming to an agreement on something, where they can demonstrate some bipartisan support. And bicycling and walking has always been, and you guys have demonstrated it over and over and over again, has always been an area where you can have bipartisan support. So I think really stressing some of those messages that this is something that can save money in the long run, you know, particularly in things like healthcare costs or environmental cleanup costs, or, and we'll talk about sort of how to frame some of those messages in a minute, as well as something that people can agree to, and it can be a bipartisan effort, I think is going to be really strong when you talk to these legislators. So given that larger context of stuff, these are the things that tend to resonate. So the first key, knowing, looking at that large, that's just sort of a broad overview. The second key is to really know what you want. So when you think about that enormous array of things that they're working on, you have to recognize that they're really operating in a decision-making environment. And so what I mean by that is the things that rise to the top of their agenda and to the top of their mind are the things that they have to make a decision about. So going in, and this is why when I lay out your role, I stress both education and advocacy. Going in and simply educating them on what you do is not enough, because when you do that, they just think, oh, okay, well, you're educating me. I don't necessarily have to pay all that much attention. But when you ask them to do something specifically, and when they have to switch that little switch in their head that says, oh, you're asking me for something, that's when it starts, they start paying a lot more attention to it. But they move from decision to decision to decision. And I know that can be frustrating. Sometimes we wish they could take a little bit more time to learn about things. And they are making hundreds of decisions a day. So that's why this ask issue is so important. Now, of those asks, I think you have a couple kinds of asks. You have policy-related asks, and you have relationship-building asks. And for the policy-related asks, you're going to get a lot of information about that in next week's webinar. As always, those things are extremely, extremely fluid, but you'll get all the details on that, and of course, all kinds of information when you get to the summit itself. Relationship-building asks are those ones like, will you come on a bike ride in the district? Will you, visit a Safe Routes to School project? Those are relationship-building asks. You're asking them to do something that they have to make a decision on, but it's not necessarily, will you give us, a $2 gas tax or something like that, a $2 per gallon gas tax. Not that that's what we're asking for. Don't go in and ask people for that, but I'm just using that as an example of a more difficult decision that you might ask a legislator. So the point is that within that decision-making environment, you've got sort of more easy asks and you've got more difficult asks. And I think that differentiating between those is going to be useful, particularly when you're talking to legislators who you might not agree with. And I'll talk in a minute about how you deal with those situations. All right, so your homework assignment for the policy asks, first of all, there is the overall federal platform that I would encourage you to take a look at on the League's site. And so I'm actually going to go over there. And you can see here you are on the League's page. And as I mentioned, there's the Bike Summit link. So you can go in here and you can read all about the Bike Summit. And then when you go to the Federal Advocacy link, you've got a lot of information, the sign up for the action alerts, what's currently happening on the Highway Trust Fund. And so that'll give you a lot of details. I also suggest that you take a look at the federal platform. So again, these are not necessarily the specific issues that you're going to be talking about when you come to Washington, D.C., but they're going to give you a lot of background on the kinds of things, the kind of messages that you're going to be delivering. And look, there's my old boss, Congressman Blumenauer. So that for me is your homework in terms of getting ready for some of the policy discussions. Definitely join the February 26th webinar, which is at 8 o'clock. Hopefully you all have that on your schedules. And as the issue papers are available, please be sure to review them, but also know that we're not going to abandon you when you get to the summit and not give you any of that information. You will be well prepared. All right. So we talked about number one, which is knowing something about that larger context, and we talked about number two, which is knowing something about what you want, and we talked about some of the resources that you have to take a look at that. And now number three is to know who you're talking to. And by that I mean I think it would be useful if you did a little bit of research on your legislators before you came to Washington, D.C. And so I would suggest for those to take a look at the 2 senators for your state, and then to take a look at the representative of the address where you registered, excuse me. So how do we find that stuff out? Well, I've got some resources here for you to do that. So first of all, to find your representatives, if you make sure that you're on the League's page, you can go to the Action Center, and you can look up here, look up and contact your elected officials. If you haven't done that, definitely do, because this is going to give you, I'm going to use this as a jumping off point for the kinds of information that you might need. Sorry, I always use my mom's address because she's my mom. Let's see what we got. There we go. Plus, she lives in an area that's not a split district because it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. a very beautiful middle of nowhere. So when you type in your full address and you put in your zip code, you get your very specific officials. And you also notice there's state officials, so that's something if you're interested in looking at the state. Then you can click on that official's name, and you'll get the contact information, who it is, a little bit of personal information. This is important right here, the political information, which committees he or she is on. And the reason why it's important is because it gives you a sense of the kinds of issues that interest him or her. So in this case, it's a very rural district, so he's on agriculture and natural resources. So some of the more rural sort of trail, for example, arguments might be something that would work well with him. Not that you don't want to ask for everything, but part of my goal here is to make sure that you know enough about the legislators that when you go into their office, you feel comfortable that you're talking to them in a way that makes sense to them. So do the same thing for your two senators. Senator Feinstein, for example, got the same kind of information there. Now let's go back to Mr. LaMalfa because I want to show you. Oh, we don't have his web page on there. Let me actually go back to, let me go to the House of Representatives page. So once you've used that Action Center, and also if you've been on the Action Center and you haven't responded to the current alerts, please do so. You'll find out who your legislators are, and in some cases it actually does link to the websites. If it doesn't, you can go to house.gov, and this is for the representative sites. And you can also, by the way, find your representatives here. I just like to drive you to the League's site because it's got so much current information. So you would go down here and you would find the legislator. And then you get to that particular legislator's homepage. Now, in this particular case, this legislator is a Republican, and so he has some views that some people may not agree with, and others certainly do. But the reason why I ask you to do this is because I want you to know something about how he views the issues. And the tabs that I suggest you take a look at when you're doing this research is to look under the Issues tab. And I don't want you to look, I certainly want you to look at transportation, but I don't want you to look just at transportation. And the reason why that is because if you look just at transportation, you're going to get obviously one view of what he's thinking about, but all of these other issues tell you something about how he approaches the world, what kinds of words he likes to hear when you walk into his office or that his staff like to hear. And I'll talk in a minute about working with the staff. But for example, if you click on the federal spending link, and you'll see that he's talking a lot about wanting to cut federal spending, I wouldn't say that you wouldn't go in and talk about the value of bicycle and walking programs, but I would certainly start with some arguments that are more about the financial benefits and the cost savings to the government that are associated with some of these programs, or the long-term savings that are associated with some of them. So go to their websites, read those issue tabs just to give you a flavor of some of the things they're interested in. Then you can go to something, they almost all have something called the legislation tab. And if they don't, I'll show you in a minute how to look this up on congress.gov. But when you click on that link, you can usually go to something called Legislation I'm Sponsoring. So these are bills that that particular legislator has actually introduced. And so when you look at these, again, it tells you a little bit about some of the things that he is particularly interested in. And you know, in some of these, we may not find a lot of connections that we would want to make to the bicycling community. But again, when you look, you'll see that he is obviously interested in more rural issues. So if you have some of those arguments to make, it looks like he has water issues. He's from California, so obviously he's dealing with some of those. So even if you can't make a direct connection to some of his bills, still know what those are before you walk in the door. Now, in terms of looking up legislators, if you want to use this Library of Congress website, which is at congress.gov, you see here that there's a place where you can look up all the various bills for your specific legislators. Just make sure you're looking at the bills that they have introduced themselves, that they have sponsored, not necessarily the ones that, and this is actually the congress.gov site. This is the old site they have here. Not just the ones that they've signed on to, because they sign on to a lot of bills. So take a look at the congress.gov site, and you can look up your legislators there and see a lot more of their legislative history. Same things in terms of researching the senators. You can go to senate.gov, and you click on the senators. And then you can click on that senator's name. We'll just use Mr. Alexander as an example because he's at the top of the page. And so you'll see here he's got, now he doesn't have something called issues. He's got just legislation, and that happens a lot. They have all different kinds of tags for everything. So he has, we're going to take a look at his sponsored bills. And again, here you can see some of the bills that he has actually introduced. So those are just some of the things to know, the background to know about your legislators. I think it's really important to be armed with that when you walk in the door because, again, it helps you frame some of your arguments. You're not talking to the most conservative members about, you know, even though if you're asking for money, you're not talking about it in that context. You're kind of focusing in more on the cost savings to the government and those kinds of arguments. All right. So that's knowing who you're talking to. You also want to make sure that you know something about yourselves because the background that you give them is going to explain to them why you're relevant to them. And there's a couple of reasons for that. You're relevant to them because you live or you work or you serve people in their districts. So, you know, you might live in one district, you might work in another district, and you might have people that you work with who are from all over the state. And the important thing to do is to be able to demonstrate that connection to the legislator's district or state. And that's where these websites come in handy. The Rails to Trails website allows you to do project searches for the various rail trail projects in the various states. And so, you know, you can look at these as they're associated by fiscal year. You can just look for a specific state. I would obviously take a look at the ones that are associated and filter it down to the ones that are associated with bicycle and pedestrian facilities. But this tells you a lot, gives you a lot of details that you can look at about the various projects in your state, the Rail Trails projects. Another resource is the Bicycle Friendly America Awards database. And this database, you can click on the various states, and you can see what the state rank is, what the communities are, the businesses, etc. And this is the kind of information and the detail that the legislators are going to want to know because it's what connects directly to them. It's connected to the things and the people that they represent. So part of knowing who you're talking to is some notes about talking to the staff because a lot of times you are going to be talking to the staff, and that's actually a good thing because the staff, you want to build a relationship with them. Your advocacy effort is going to go much further if you get to know the staff people than it will if you're you know, having what's called a grip and grin, a shake hands and a hello with the legislator. That kind of thing is always nice, but to really move forward on your advocacy efforts, you need to get to know the staff. And I have this picture of this person here because they all are very young. They're not quite as young as that person, but you know, a lot of them are in their mid-20s, and you can sort of, when you go up to the hill and you can look at everyone, you think, man, they're all young. But they are the best and the brightest, so never feel, if you have a meeting with a staff person, never feel like you're being pushed off onto someone who's not important because they are some of the most important people in the office. The main difference, a lot of people are concerned about how you talk to staff versus how you talk to members, and it's really just a matter of pronouns. Instead of saying, as you would to a legislator, will you sign on to this bill, you would say to a staff person, will your boss sign on to this bill? Or instead of, as you would say to a legislator, will you come and visit us in the community, you would say to the staff person, will your boss come and visit us in the community? But that's the only difference. The staff are really considered sort of appendages of the legislator, and they rarely express opinions of their own. And in some cases, they're not allowed to have them. So, but you know, remember, your meetings would probably be with some of these staff people, and again, that's a good thing. Some key points there. Talk to the right person, and that's the person who handles your issues. The state coordinators and we here at Advocacy Associates, when we can't get meetings with the legislators, are asking for staff people. So that would be the transportation staff people. Remember that your issue is one of many. They're often handling, especially on the House side, dozens of issues, transportation, housing, environment, healthcare. they a lot of times handle a whole bunch of different issues, and so they may not know as much about bicycling in the community as you do, which is exactly why you're there. So what they're really looking for are the people who know about that, and then how to find you when they need to talk to you and when their boss is going to be voting on something. Again, as I mentioned, staff contact has advantages over member contact. Institutional memory can be very short. Turnover is often very high, and you'll find this especially when you're here in March because of the new Congress and the new members. Many of the staff people who you've met with in the past, if you've been there, here in the past, have moved over to a new elected official's office, so you'll still have those relationships. But you'll also find that there's a lot of new staff people. And my main suggestion there is to just be nice to every staff person that you meet, because you never know where they're going to wind up. And that's always a good strategy for life as well. And of course, as I've mentioned, expect and appreciate youth. They definitely are the best and the brightest, so even though they look super young, they're the ones you want to get to know. All right, so your homework assignment for this one, number 3, which was to know something about your audience. These are the kinds of things that you should do. Visit their websites, check out the bills they've introduced, sign up for their e-newsletters, go to another website that I didn't show you was VoteSmart, and that site is at votesmart.org. And that's where you can look up information. Actually, I am going to take you there because that gives you information about newer members, and I think that would be useful for you as you come to Washington, D.C. in March. Open Secrets is a great website to see who has contributed to their campaigns. That is information that you have as background, but you don't talk about it in the meetings. It's just good to know. But trying to tie the policy to the politics often frustrates them, and they really don't like it when you talk about the campaign in their office. So look it up, and I'll show you in a minute how to do that. But you know, obviously don't go into their office and say, hey, I saw so-and-so contributed to your campaign. And then connect on social media. That's, you know, see them on Facebook, see them on Twitter, see them on YouTube before you come, so that you can, you know, start getting a flavor for the way that they approach the world. Let me show you VoteSmart and Open Secrets, because I think those will be useful to you at some point. And I think maybe I pulled one of those up. Let's go to Open Secrets. All right, so at Open Secrets, you'll see that you can go to, scroll over politics and elections and take a look at Congress, who are going to be the people you're meeting with. And you'll see that the leadership comes up, but you can search the database for a particular legislator. We'll just do LaMalfa, since he's the one that we were looking at earlier. That's the one from my mom's district. And when you click on this, you'll see that you've got different races, and you'll see that you can see the summary here of his fundraising. It gives you the top 5 contributors. You see he's fairly conservative. Isn't that interesting? The National Auto Dealers Association. So that would be an extremely interesting thing to know before you go in and see him. I don't know if anyone has any meetings with him, but, and again, this would be a perfect example of not walking into his office and saying, I saw you took money from these people, so you're not going to agree with me, which people did to me all the time, and I hated that. But knowing that, you know how to change your message so that it's something that might resonate with him. One thing I think is also a good idea, and you don't have to do this before you come to Washington, D.C., but to take a look at the donor list. And you'll see the top 20 contributors, but you can that will give you a much larger list of the different groups that that have contributed, who have invested in his campaign, as we like to say. So, and in some cases, when you look at the entire list, you'll find the individual contributors, and sometimes you might be able to match some of those to your own board members or other people that are involved in your cause. So that's Open Secrets. Let me see if I can take you to VoteSmart. And while that page is loading, I'm just going to see if we have any questions. All right, I think we're good on the questions. VoteSmart was having a little issue with me earlier. So I'll wait to see if it comes up, and as we're trying to see if it comes up, what I will say on, no, it's not coming up. What I will say, it really does work. Not right now. But on VoteSmart, you can look up your legislators, and it will give you a bio, and then you'll see that there are some folders to the side of that bio. You can click on the one that says Speeches. And under Speeches, you will see content about everything they've given a speech on. And I don't want you to read all of their speeches since the beginning of time. But again, when you do that, you'll see the kinds of things that they're talking about and what some of the things are that are already at the top of their agenda. This is the way a lot of people ask me, how do I push what I want up to the top of their agenda? And I don't think you can. I think you need to find out what's already at the top of their agenda and then talk about that and try to tie your issue to that. So that's why we're doing so much talking about how you learn about your legislators. And also, we have a homework resource for you. These materials will be available on the League site, but I also have a place where you can download it now if you'd like. And I'm actually going to put that into the chat box. So it's a site called Kiwi Live. I'm experimenting with this. And when you go to that site, it will ask you for a passcode, and the passcode is advocacy. And there you can download a legislator intel worksheet and the PowerPoint slides that we have here today. And you can do that right now. If it doesn't work, let me know, but it should work. I think, yeah, kiwilive.com. And if we're not able to get those to you right now, you can get them from the League. The League will have those available on the site as well. And again, this recording as well. All right, so we talked about looking at that larger context. We talked about knowing what you want. We've talked about knowing who you're talking to. And now I want to talk a little bit about knowing how to talk to them. And to me, this is the SPIT technique, which is an acronym because we are required to have at least one acronym a day. And SPIT stands for Specific, Personal, Informative, and Timely. So the S, specific, means what specifically do you want and why specifically would that be important to the legislator. So the specific ask is what we've talked about in terms of what you're looking for, but all that research you just did about the legislator is going to help you frame something that will connect it to him or her. Personal, that's really one of the key things that you're here to do, that you're coming to Washington, D.C. to do, is to connect the extremely weird things that happen in Washington, D.C. back to the districts, back to the people that they represent. And so if you've got local stories, that can be personal, local stories about projects that you've worked on, about kids that you've helped if you've done Safe Route School, about how you've reduced commuting times in the district. Whatever kind of localized or personal story you can tell, I think that's going to be valuable to the elected officials. That's what they're looking for. They do certainly want you to have information, but they don't expect you to be the policy experts. They don't expect you to be the ones that come in and talk about bill number 645 of Code 973. They expect you to give them some taste of how those things impact the district. That said, you do want to have information. You do want to be informative, and a lot of that information has to do with how the particular community is impacted. And so when I showed you those sites about looking up the projects and looking up the details about the bicycle-friendly communities, that's the kind of information that they want. They don't necessarily care about what 3 out of 4 Americans think. They care most about what 3 out of 4 of their constituents think. And so that's you can get down to that level of detail on those sites. And then timely. All of these communications should be made, obviously, before they have to make decisions, which means that when you're here in March, that is an excellent, excellent time to be here because they really are starting that debate. And as Karen mentioned, there's certainly talk about whether they believe that bicycling and walking should be part of the transportation reauthorization, and we certainly need to get the message in early that that's still an important part of our transportation system. So that SPIT technique is something to think about in terms of how you want to approach it. Now, this is a message formula that I constructed that kind of gives you all of these elements into a 7-point plan for your conversation. And you'll have some opportunities to work with your state coordinators, to work with other people in your state to organize these messages. You will be going to meetings with a lot of people from your various states, so you'll all have to coordinate about who's the constituent and who has the best story and which issue is the one that you might want to really focus on with that particular legislator. But you can use this message formula to craft those individual messages. So hello, my name is, that's where you say your name, and I'm from, that's where you explain I'm from such and such store in your district, or I'm working with such and such group that has trails in all 3 of these congressional districts. It establishes your relevancy to them. I'm here to talk to you about, that's where you make your key policy asks, and those are the ones that are going to be going over next week in the webinar next week. So, but that's where you're going to make those policy asks. Knowing of your interest in, this is where you fit in some of that research that you've done about your audience. So let's say you were talking to a more conservative member, but you've seen that he's introduced legislation on helping small businesses. So that can be a way that you would approach him. You would say, knowing of your interest in helping small businesses, I think you'll be interested in this as well because we have a number of small businesses in the community that are connected to this. You don't have to be a small business yourself, obviously, but that would be the way to kind of circle into some of the stuff that he's most interested in. This is important to the people I represent because that's where you tell that personal local story. Here's how it directly impacts your constituents. That's why I really hope that you will, and that's where you make your ask and make it again because you've already made it up at the top. But will you co-sponsor such and such bill? Will you support such and such level of appropriations? And that ask has to be an actual ask. It has to be in the form of a question. It's just like Jeopardy. And the reason why it has to be that way is because if you don't ask, then they will have an excuse to say, oh, well, you never asked me to do that. You talked about how important it was, but you never asked me if I would make a decision in terms of supporting you. So the ask is critical. I'd like to follow up by. That's where you come up with some follow-up ideas. And I'm going to talk just a little bit on knowing how to follow up because I think it's very, very good to have a follow-up plan before you walk in the door so that when they say, well, you know, I'd love to connect with you in the district, you have a response to that, a very specific idea. And then you're going to want to ask them, obviously, for some of their contact information. And you'd be surprised how many times we actually forget that. But it is absolutely critically important. So your homework there is to really just take a look at that message formula and try and come up with a message that you think might make sense for you. Now, I realize that I have some other slides that I think might be useful for you, and so I want to just pull these out. Sorry. As I was talking, I realized that this might be a useful thing for you, and so I want to make sure that I'm addressing everything. All right. So addressing concerns, because I know some people have a lot of concerns about how they're going to approach the meetings, and so I just wanted to talk through these a little bit. And as I do, let me check to see if we've got any questions at this point. Contact information. Yes, we are asking for theirs, and we are making sure they have yours. So it's an equal exchange of contact information. And you'll be learning a lot about the Lobby Day app that we have that's going to have all your meetings, et cetera, on it. And that's a great way. You'll have some of their contact information there, but you can use the app to directly email them some of the talking papers, and so you'll have that email. But you definitely want to make sure that they know how to get in touch with you as well. All right, so addressing some concerns. Talking to legislators with whom you disagree, and it's always a big concern. You have a legislator who you hate, and yet you still have to go talk to them. Agree to disagree is always a great phrase to practice. And you know, I also suggest when you're in that situation, see if you can get them to a smaller yes. You know, maybe they're not ever going to agree with you on the amount that you would want to raise the gas tax, but they might be able to agree to come and visit you in the district, to see a project, to go on a bike ride, to join the bike caucus. That's a pretty easy ask. And if you can get them to a little yes, you're much more likely to get them to a bigger yes at some point. All right. Other concerns, legislators and staff will be mean to people of a different party. The legislators and the staff people are really more interested in constituency than party. They want to know that you are from their district. Certainly you might, in some cases, see the world differently than they do, but really having a conversation with them about the district is going to definitely get you off on the right foot with them. I don't want to look foolish. People kind of get concerned about that. You know, that you might forget the bill number, or you might not know the exact level of the appropriations, or there's all kinds of confusing things that are going on. They don't expect you to be policy experts. They expect you to be experts on what's happening on bicycling in the community. So, you know, it's nice that you're going to have all those asks and make sure that you have them and leave the leave behind materials. But if you get the bill number wrong, or if you ask someone in the House for something that you want from the Senate, life will go on, and no one's going to think that you're an awful, terrible person. So if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, all you say is, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. Another concern people have is, I'll say something that will ruin it for everyone else. There's really anything that you can do that will do that. I did have one situation where there was a reception, and one of the advocates went to the reception and drank a whole bunch of wine and then yelled at a legislator. So that will indeed ruin it for almost everyone. But for the most part, there's rarely anything you can do that will do that. Just, you know, obviously these are people who you're dealing with, so try to be as polite as you possibly can, even when they're frustrating you. It's a skill that we in Washington, D.C. have come to learn very well. All right. So we had our understanding the larger context, so that was our number one step. Number two step was to make sure that you knew a little bit about the issues, and you're going to learn a lot more about that at the policy webinar next week. But you can look at some of those sort of general legislative platform things on the Bike League's page. Then number three was some of that research about the legislators. And hopefully you saw in the chat box, you can go to the Kiwi Live site and type in the word advocacy, and you should have there some documents you can download, this PowerPoint and a legislator intel form. And you can use that to do your research that you need to do before you come to Washington, D.C. And don't feel like you have to do all of that. If you do 1/3 of that, you will be yards ahead of where everyone else is. And then this know how to talk to them, going over the message formula, thinking really about what you want to say to each individual office. I think is going to be valuable and put you in a good spot. All right. So number 5 is that knowing how to follow up, and I think it's just a matter of recognizing that there are a whole bunch of influence strategies you can use when you get back home. So you've got social media connections. Definitely see if you can take pictures in the meetings and then have them go on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or whatever thing the kids using these days. Carrier pigeon, Pinterest, I understand, is a big one. But all those pictures or comments you can put on the Facebook page, and they always love to have things where other people see that they've been meeting with you in Washington, D.C. or in the district, that they like to put things up about that because it shows their connections to home. You know, obviously always ask. Sometimes the staff are uncomfortable with that, but social media connections really important. One of the great asks you can make, a very easy relationship building ask, is, will you follow us on social media? Asking the legislator's office to do that gets you into their news feed on an ongoing basis, so they can see what you're working on. And a lot of people don't think to ask that, so that's a little secret that you get just from me. A couple other follow-ups: town hall, site visits, Capitol days. I want to just in a minute give you your homework assignment that has to do with that. But another great ask for while you're here is to ask them when their next town hall meeting is. And those are when they're in the district and they have a community meeting and they invite everyone in the community, and you can go. And if you go a few minutes early and stay a few minutes late, you can usually meet them, shake their hand, remind them that you were in Washington, D.C., and it's a great way to demonstrate that you're in it for the long haul. You didn't just come and ask once, but you really want to build a long-term relationship with them. And that's especially good for the newer members. And then some of the other strategies for following up. Now, this is your kind of homework assignment for that, is to prepare that follow-up plan before you walk in the door. Have a very specific idea of something that you would want to show the legislator or a staff person. The D.C. staff often come to the districts or the district staff people. And I don't have a lot of opportunity to talk a lot about district staff, but they do all have staff the legislators do all have staff in the district, and they love to go see things in the district. So think about that follow-up plan before you walk in the door. Think about thank you notes on the app that you'll be getting as part of the scheduling, so you'll get access to the app when we get to Washington, D.C. You can send notes to the staff people from there, and so that's always a great way. If you do want to handwrite thank you notes and you don't have serial killer handwriting, then you can do that, but you should deliver them before you leave, because you can't send pieces of paper to Capitol Hill without them going through an irradiation process, and they come out of that brown and crunchy and smelling bad. So you don't want to have that happen. As I mentioned, ask about their upcoming town hall meetings. Think about what you can show them at home, and think about when you could meet with their staff back at home. So that's your homework assignment for that. I also wanted to show, as part of that follow-up, the Bike League has a great how to set up, not that one, how to set up a congressional district visit, and I'm not sure if I'd actually pulled it up specifically. So you'll see under federal advocacy, you'll see that you've got all of this different information on how to be engaged. You can take a look into the Action Center. You've got details there on how to get more engaged. You've got the advocacy campaigns, a survey campaign, a petition campaign. Under additional resources, there's a great how to plan a show Congress event. And this is something, if you have an opportunity, take a quick look at it before you come to Washington, D.C. So you've got some very specific ideas about what you'd like to show the Congress, member of Congress or the staff person when they come back from the district. And with that, I'm going to double check to see if we've got questions. I have a couple more comments in your checklist, but I want to make sure we get to your questions. And I should note that if you do go to the Kiwi Live site to download those materials, you don't have to enter your name or email. I just want to make that clear. I should have made that clear earlier. You can be as secretive as you want. I just wanted an easy way to get you the material, so don't feel like you're signing up for anything. You can just easily download it there. All right, we don't have any additional questions at this point, so do make sure, if you've got questions, to type them into the Q&A box. Let's go on to one of our most important points before we wrap up here, which is to have fun. This isn't supposed to be a trip to the dentist. Participating in your democracy is supposed to be a good and wonderful thing, and I know it's frustrating right now, and sometimes it doesn't feel like all that much fun, but fun is good, as Dr. Seuss said, so definitely try to do that when you're thinking about coming here. It's a good, fun process that a lot of people don't get to do around the world. So, all right, so your checklist. Just as you come to D.C., think about these things. What are you asking for? Why might your audience want that? What stories can you tell? How can you connect with staff? And what's your ideas for a follow-up? And I think I'm going to leave it on this checklist so you've got that basic information. And I'm going to check to see if we've got any questions here. And I think we're good on questions. So I'm going to, if you've got questions, do feel free to type them in, and we'll stay on for a little bit and address them as we've got questions. And also you can email them to us. We will be happy to address them then. But I'm going to have Karen give us a couple of remarks to close. And Karen, I'm going to unmute your line. So please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. That was great. And I just want to let everyone know, as Stephanie said, there's a lot of different ways you can do research. Do a little bit. You can talk to your state coordinator. Maybe you can divide some up, and so that you can talk about it. At the summit, we'll have 2 opportunities for you to sit with your state delegation and talk through all this. So don't feel like you have to know it all right before you come, but doing that research, having some ideas, will make you feel a lot more comfortable when you go into your meeting, and as Stephanie said, it will make you more effective when you're there. So again, thanks Stephanie, thanks everyone, and we'll talk again next week.
Great, thanks Karen. I muted your line. We did have one question as to whether there's any point to visiting the district staff office before coming to the summit. If you have the opportunity to do so, I think that's a good idea. I would say that you don't have to. It would definitely be something that you could do after and be a good follow-up activity. But if you can, going and seeing them and saying, hey, I'm going to Washington, D.C. in a week or so, and we really eager to talk to the congressman about what we're doing in the community. The district staff often don't work on policy issues, so what they're really doing is getting to know people in the district. So just remember that as you're talking with them, that they may not have all the details on transportation reauthorization or that sort of thing. But that's a great question. And to Karen's point, I know we gave you a whole bunch of stuff, and so it's always hard to strike that balance between I want you to be effective and I don't want to overwhelm you. So like she said, pick a few things, even if you do one of them. Even if you go find your legislator on Facebook and follow him or her on it, you will have done far more than 90% of the people who come to Washington, D.C. So with that, I don't think we have any additional questions. I really appreciate you taking the time this evening. And for those of us in the East, we're going to do our best to stay warm. My heater broke right before the start of this session, so my teeth are chattering, that's why. But hopefully we'll have better weather for you in March, and I really appreciate you spending the time this evening. Let us know if we can help you, and get ready to go forth and advocate and make us proud. Thanks a lot.